thank you, Chairwoman Maloney. January 6th is a day that a lot of us are going to remember from forever. I was in the gallery. I was one of about a dozen members who got trapped in the gallery trying to escape. As the doors shut on us, we were all fearful of our life. We had to duck and cover behind whatever we can find, flimsy chairs, a little wall, whatever we could find. And some members couldn't hide at all. And I was sitting there and I texted my wife that I was trying to get out and I was with Capitol Police, but I didn't want to tell her, oh, I love you. I didn't want to say any of those words because then it might create a lot of fear in her. But I knew that we're in a bad situation, and I knew that if the mob got in, that bad things could happen. So I took off my jacket earlier, my lapel pin, my tie, because I didn't want to look like a member of Congress. And I believe it wasn't enough to impeach President Trump for high crimes and misdemeanors by inciting violence against the U.S. government, because he wasn't alone. Some members of this body have insisted and continue to insist that President Joe Biden was not duly elected. Audit after audit and court case after court case has affirmed that the fact that Donald Trump was defeated fairly by President Joe Biden. And yet these conspiracy theories continue, and they proliferate online, are given oxygen within the Republican Party. Many of them have failed to condemn and today have expelled one of their own from their, quote, big tent of leadership for not subscribing to this lie. In the name of this debunked conspiracy theory, violence was committed here, and further violence has been promoted against other elected officials, including our colleagues. My colleague Marjorie Taylor Greene has gone on record, quote, saying Speaker Pelosi is a traitor to our country and guilty of treason, and a crime punishable by death is what treason is. This, of course, is a baseless claim. This rhetoric remains a threat to our democracy and to all public servants charged with keeping our democracy running. As we investigate the failure of the federal government to respond to white supremacists, we have also an obligation to create an independent commission to support ongoing congressional oversight and examine root causes of this insurrection. This includes the investigation of any of its own members that might have instigated or incited the storming of the U.S. Capitol for their own political gain. Mr. Miller, in your testimony, you have stated an obligation to prevent a constitutional crisis. What concerns did you have regarding the possibility of a coup and whether the armed forces would be co-opted in an effort to overturn the results of the election?
I had absolutely no concerns that the armed forces of the United States were going to violate their sacred oath of the Constitution. I was extremely concerned by the imprecise and inflammatory rhetoric that was out there that somehow the armed forces were at risk of that. And number two, if I would have put U.S. military forces on Capitol Hill before the events of January 6th, I feel very confident that that would have created, reinforced the narrative by many that the armed forces were going to try to weigh in and overturn the election, and I wasn't going to have that happen.
And Mr. Miller, so I didn't have any belief that they would turn either. I know a lot of my constituents did, but I didn't think that would happen just because of the professionality of the women in uniform. Earlier, you walked back on Trump's responsibility in the January 6th insurrection by saying there was a difference between the march and the assault. Do you believe that Trump had no role in the assault?
I have absolutely no idea. I can't imagine he did. But thank you for highlighting that. And your explanation of the fear that goes on with this, that the same sort of thing is happening to our soldiers as we're getting them ready to go. So that's another important factor that goes into how long it takes to plan and make sure that they're ready to go. So thank you for bringing that up and highlighting that again.
But do you also view, when somebody repeats that the only way that they can get their country back, that it was stolen from them, that those words coming from the Commander-in-Chief of the United States of America and the armed forces could be enough to incite the incidents on January 6th?
It absolutely could. It could be. I know the clock just hit. You know, I have family. I'm no longer under protection. And no matter what I say in this matter, half of the population, and there's some wingnuts on both sides that are going to now send me crazy letters and threaten my family. And that's why I'm being very delicate of how I respond to this. It's not because I don't have a view. It's because I'm out there alone and unafraid. I want to be clear with that. I can take care of myself. So I appreciate your consideration of those matters for those of us that are out of government now.
And Mr. Miller, just that fear exists across the board on both sides. And I think that's what's causing some of the behavior, is that a real fear that elected officials, their families would be targeted. And that's one of the things that we both agree on both sides of the aisle, that we have to condemn that. With that, I yield back.
Yields back, and the gentlewoman from Massachusetts, Ms. Presley, is recognized for 5 minutes. Ms. Presley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On December 19th, 2020, Donald Trump tweeted, "Big protest in D.C. on January 6th. Be there, will be wild." This was 5 days after the Electoral College certification. And indeed, it was very wild. There were people brandishing Trump flags, Confederate flags, wearing T-shirts that said Camp Auschwitz, referring to United States Capitol Police officers who are Black Americans, hurling racial epithets at them using the N-word, and a noose was erected on the west lawn of the Capitol. This was a violent white supremacist mob who assaulted the nation's capital. It was a deadly and dangerous insurrection that was incited by Donald Trump. And I want to just hold space for the congressional staff, the custodial workers, the food service workers, the members, and all who experienced trauma, those who endured injury, and hold space for those who lost their lives. And for those custodians who demonstrated true patriotism, cleaning up a ransacked space after a violent white supremacist mob so that we could continue to honor our constitutional duties, and our clerks who worked through the night as well. These events have taken undoubtedly a mental and physical toll. And we have to provide the Capitol Police and everyone who labors in Congress with the comprehensive mental health supports and resources that they deserve and desperately require. Furthermore, as members of Congress, it is our duty to investigate and to rectify the circumstances that failed them in the first place. The response by the DOJ and the DOD on January 6th was delayed, it was disorganized, and compared to previous months, it was deficient. When community organizers and people of all ages took to the streets chanting Black Lives Matter following the murder of George Floyd last May, the Trump administration used every tool at its disposal to try and stop them, including rubber bullets and chemical warfare. Former Secretary of Defense Mark Esper said, quote, "I think the sooner that you mass and dominate the battle space, the quicker this dissipates," unquote. Here in DC, to intimidate peaceful protesters calling for racial equity, the Department of Justice activated a plethora of federal law enforcement agencies, including the U.S. Park Police, FBI, Bureau of Prisons, U.S. Marshal Service, ATF, CBP, and even the TSA. Armed federal officials were wearing unmarked gear and they dominated the streets. Mr. Rosen, you were Deputy Attorney General when the racial justice protests took place during the summer of 2020. Mr. Rosen, were you aware of DOJ's efforts to mobilize a federal security response during the summer of 2020 in the streets of Washington, D.C.? Yes or no?
Congresswoman, I'm going to say what I said before, because I think it's important to start with the fact that the entire time I was at the Department of Justice, I deplored and had no patience for any forms of hatred, bigotry, discrimination. And that was never something we would tolerate. We prosecuted many instances of hate crimes and of racially and ethnically motivated violence.
Reclaiming my time. Mr. Rosen, you were the head of the lead federal agency responsible for coordinating the preparations for January 6th. For the record, how many personnel did you coordinate from the TSA for January 6th?
No, I think you're under a mistaken impression. I didn't have any authority over personnel from TSA or other agencies. Okay. We did coordinate information sharing.
Reclaiming my time. Can you, for the record, share with us what personnel from CBP, ICE, and TSA were engaged for the events on January 6th? Can you provide that?
A little bit. I think you would need to talk to the Department of Homeland Security, but it was my understanding that there were federal agents from DHS who went to the Capitol to assist with the restoration of order, along with the others from DOJ and the MPD and other police forces.
Well, we'll follow up, but reclaiming my time for now. Mr. Rosen, do you agree, based on your observation and your expertise, that the DOJ acted differently in preparation for the January 6th attack than it did during the summer of 2020? Just a yes or no.
I think we're talking about two very different situations, and in both, the responses were tailored to the situation at the time. I would say that on January 6th in particular, because that's what I'm here for today, I feel that while it was a horrendous day, and I appreciated the justified anger that you and others have expressed, because I don't think anyone in Congress should ever have to deal with that again and shouldn't have had to that day.
Mr. Rosen, yes or no? Was the preparation different? Yes or no? Was it different for Black Lives Matter than it was on January 6th?
I think we're talking about very different situations.
Okay, reclaiming my time.
Madam Chair, our time has expired.
Let me answer. Okay, the last speaker we have now and the last questioner is the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Quigley. You're now recognized for 5 minutes, Mr. Quigley.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Mr. Miller, you had told the chairwoman earlier today that you didn't speak with former President Trump on January 6th. However, a reporter quoted another senior defense official who said they couldn't get through. They tried to call him. To your knowledge, did you or anybody you know try to contact President Trump on January 6th?
I did not, and to the best of my knowledge, I'm not aware of anyone else that did it from my office either.
Was there a discussion about whether or not the president should be reached about this?
No,
during all this discussions that were taking place, the decisions that had to be made?
No, I had all the authority I needed to make the decisions.
Also, in the aftermath of January 6th, to your knowledge, did anyone at the White House or DOD attempt to limit the scope, the degree in which DOD or DOD personnel cooperated with any investigation, including congressional investigations into the January 6th attacks?
No, there's been nothing like that that I'm aware of.
Look, I'm the last questioner. I'm struck with what you've said twice now, that you wouldn't change anything about the DOD's response on January 6th, that you have no regrets. I mean, it's coming from the military. We lost that battle, right? I too was in the room where it happened, and it's almost like someone in the military saying, sure, we lost the battle, but we carried out our plan perfectly. I can't imagine you'd look back at that and see the results of what took place and say somehow that is a victory or that you succeeded somehow.
There were 8,000 badged and credentialed police officers on duty that day. I don't know how many from the Capitol. I want to highlight Chief Conte, who did all hands on deck, which was very laudable in his force degree.
I'm just talking about DOD. And again, how would you answer this? If this is a victory, if this is success, how would you have classified a failure?
I want to highlight it's not the correct role for the Department of Defense and our armed forces to be involved in civilian law enforcement matters except as the absolutely last resort and when all civilian law enforcement has been expended. That did not occur until about 2:30 in my estimation.
The last resort, You came in after the fact. I was in the room. I remember hearing colleagues saying, when does the effing cavalry get here? If you were the effing cavalry, you never showed up. You never got there on time. And we were exposed because of this. This isn't anyway. I just respect you a lot more if you said we could have done this and this better. And I thought with that, okay, you're at least trying. Okay, you don't win every battle, but to lose a battle and to say it was everybody else's fault,
that
just does a disservice to the Department of Defense.
That's not what I've said. If we had a valid request and a necessary request from your body, I guarantee you that the Department of Defense would have been there in strength as required.
All right. So, you would acknowledge we lost the battle. We lost the battle for the first time since 1814.
Horrifying.
And it was everybody else's fault but DOD.
I absolutely disagree with the statement that it was everybody.
I'm paraphrasing you the only way that makes sense when you say you wouldn't do anything differently. You wouldn't do anything differently. Okay, that implies what I'm saying, that it was everybody else's fault in your mind, because it was a catastrophic failure.
And I just had an obligation to protect and defend the Constitution and guarantee that the armed forces were used appropriately and not in a manner that would be seen as extra constitutional.
Look, the Constitution is not a treaty of surrender. It affords you the opportunity to do what's necessary to defend.
Hello and welcome to the Nomiki Show. It is Wednesday, May 12th. I am Nomiki Konst, and today we have another installment of Out of Touch Politicians, the series that makes you scream, these people want to govern us, and they have no idea how we live. In our last episode of Out of Touch Politicians, Mitch McConnell called enhanced unemployment benefits, the equivalent to $15 an hour, lucrative. That was just yesterday. Well, today we learn that you don't have to be a callous Republican to be totally, wildly out of touch with real people. In this installment of Out of Touch Politicians, we take you to the progressive-ish heartland of New York City and to the race for the Democratic nomination for mayor. The election is on June 22nd. It is a ranked choice voting election. Is also a wild matching funds election of 1 to 8 in matching funds. So the candidates were asked, what is the median price to buy a home in the borough of Brooklyn? There are not many challenges facing New Yorkers bigger than the question of finding an affordable place to live. Good theme, right? But most of us in New York can't even think about buying a place to live because it is way too expensive. So we fork over rent, which, as we know, is way too damn high. You'd think that anyone who wants to be our mayor might have some sense of the scale of the problem. You think? You think as we're facing an evictions crisis, as people have been forced to leave their homes and have to pay back rent in the midst of a COVID economic crisis, you'd think at least they would have asked their consultants for some research. So when I ran for office in New York, I did the research on housing costs myself. Oh my God, and no consultants told me to do it. Well, not Sean Donovan, who actually used to be the housing commissioner. Literally. and not Ray McGuire, who made millions at Citibank, which of course is one of New York's biggest mortgage lenders. Housing crisis, anyone? Sean Donovan said he guessed the median price for a home in Brooklyn was $100,000. McGuire, Mr. Citibank McGuire, thought it was, are you ready for this? $80,000 to $90,000. Who are these people? You can barely buy a parking space for $80,000 a year in New York if you can afford a car and the insurance and the gas. If they were off by a bit, this may not be a big deal. Nobody expects the mayor to memorize every vital statistic, but they were way off by a factor of 9 or 10. The actual median price is $900,000. And Catherine Garcia, who was just endorsed by the New York Times, is the former sanitation commissioner, whose campaign is on the rise, came close, estimating $800,000. And so did Scott Stringer, whose campaign isn't a free fall. He said an even million for a Brooklyn home, but he is the controller of New York City, so he should know. He covers the finances. Is this ridiculous? Oh, but wait, it gets better. Eric Adams, who is rising to the top right now and who is my bet on winning, not my choice, but my bet, and has been the whole time. Eric Adams is the borough president of Brooklyn. And he came in at $550,000. Amazingly, since I think he is he's on the same plane, on some other plane of existence, the other candidate who made the number exactly right, probably because he had good consultants, is Andrew Yang. By the way, there were also candidates who way overstayed the prices, which feels to me like a kind of fancy virtue signaling. Maya Wiley, she guessed $1.8 million. There is one other amazing piece to this entire kerfuffle. The question about home prices in Brooklyn was to put the candidates by the editorial page of the New York Times, which dropped in for a brief cameo appearance in local coverage of New York City. Way to do it, New York Times. If the New York Times wants to make a contribution, they should focus their attention on, the profound shortage of affordable housing in New York, or the eviction crisis in New York. Maybe ask the mayors how they're going to deal with that. How they're going to deal with the fact that small businesses who don't have small business rent control still, after, a decade of discussing this in the city council. Maybe take on the real estate industry, which has completely strangled our city. The horrifying conditions in public housing. Sean Donovan, what's your opinion on that? It's not like you had any say in that during the Obama administration. And the rents, which even after the pandemic are still way too expensive for most of us. Most New Yorkers, as I said, rent their homes or their apartments. When I ran for New York City Public Advocate, I was on stage one night with a dozen other candidates. The candidates were asked who rented and who had cars. Are you ready for this? There were 17 people on the ballot. I think there were 12 people on stage that night. I was the only candidate who rented, and only one other candidate didn't have a car. Buying is already a sign that you're in the elite in New York. You've made it into higher spheres of New York incomes. So it is no wonder that the New York Times asked about buying. Just frame the question that way is incredibly elitist. The main question in New York City isn't about buying. It is about building more affordable rental housing. And I'm not talking about this pseudo lottery, poor door rental housing where you still have to pay thousands of dollars. Public housing, which is despicable in terms of how people are being housed, with lead, dirty pipes, broken ceilings, dilapidated housing. People are paying thousands of dollars a month in New York City to pay for their homes in New York City public housing in NYCHA. This is about clearing out the tax incentives for developers. It is about our supposed progressive city council members not only no longer taking real estate developer money, but no longer rezoning their neighborhoods for big developers. There are too many supposed progressives who show up at DSA protests who have rezoned their neighborhoods for high rises with poor doors, yet won't take on those developers because that's the fourth rail of politics in New York City. So even as the New York Times succeeded in showing how out of touch some of the candidates were, they also showed how out of touch they are. This is even worse than George Bush Sr.'s "what's the price of milk" moment. This is how stark our inequality is. The highest inequality in the country before the COVID economic crisis. The journalists of New York are in a bubble, echoing each other on Twitter, more concerned with drama rather than digging in deep. And the candidates are protected by their consultants, their donors, and the institutions which support them, who often take the money from the bad actors, even if the candidates that they support do not take that money. They are from Mars, and the rest of us New Yorkers are stuck on Venus. And Elon Musk is not coming to save us. And it is incredibly hard already to make ends meet in New York. But once this economic crisis sets in, we know what the eviction numbers are. We see how developers have been protected. We see how much money we're all going to owe for those of us who haven't been able to afford our rent, who've lost our jobs, who've lost income, who've lost healthcare, who've had family members affected by COVID and the debt that's ensued. We've been living off of credit cards, if you even have access to credit cards, who need to take the subway, but the subway doesn't work because it's been starved. The hours have been cut. Who can't afford Uber rides into the city when the subway's not working because those Uber rides cost $40 to $50 to $60 a ride, and you'll be late to work and you might lose your job. To the single mothers, to the caregivers, to the undocumented people. That's the city that we face today. And so a big part of this problem is not just about how out of touch our leaders are. It's about how out of touch our journalists are. People who are running for office should have a sense of what their communities are like, their cities are like. And I'm not talking about talking points. I'm talking about really understanding the numbers on the ground. We're going to be facing a very different type of New York City and cities across America and communities across America once the real numbers come in. And that's something that our local leaders are going to have to face, the progressive institutions are going to have to face, and the Biden administration is going to have to face. And the least that can be done is maybe the consultants will be able to brief you. Or you can call me because I know firsthand how expensive it is to find a place to live in New York. All right, we have a great show for you today. Jordan Zakarin and Simon Narode are here. And when we come back, Erika Andiola is here. She is the Chief Advocacy Officer for Raices, the Refugee and Immigration Center for Education and Legal Services, good friend from the Bernie campaign. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back to the Nomiki Show. Erika Andiola is the Chief Advocacy Officer for Raices, which is technically the Refugee and Immigration Center for Education and Legal Services, but also means roots. So, Erika, hi. It's been a while. How you doing?
Hi, doing well. Are you able to hear me just fine?
You sound great. You look great. As always.
Yeah, no, doing great. There's a lot going on, but always good.
So I'm really excited you're on because yesterday I got sucked into this like Fox News interview where we were talking about the border crisis, but it was one of those libertarian hosts, but also I guess leaders because it's a small movement, who framed the argument as if, oh my God, these poor women and children at the border, why won't Biden do anything? What is going on? And there was a Wi-Fi delay. I lost my mind. Listen, Biden's not perfect. I can't wait to hear your perspective on this. But I was like, excuse me, I'm sorry, what? Stephen Miller? Anything have to do with the cronyism? They have reframed this entire debate, the right wing, as if it was created in the last 3 months. And by no means was it not created before the Trump administration, but like I mean, they get away with it. So I guess my first question for you is, what is the state of the actual debate right now?
Yeah. Well, we can look at it from maybe a few different perspectives, right? One perspective is that the amount of harm that the Trump administration had within the immigrant community and what he did to our, migrant sisters and brothers who were coming through when he was president, I think it created enough awareness about the conditions of inhumanity that exist at the border that more and more people were willing to speak up and say, we can't have kids in cages. We can't have all these terrible inhumane practices done in our name as the United States. And so now you see some Republicans, even including, it's crazy, but including Ted Cruz, the governor also the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, and others, using this argument that now the Biden administration are being inhumane, right? Which is, to be honest, is a different conversation than they had, several years ago, where it was all about, the illegal aliens and the criminals and all that. Not that they have changed some of that, but I would say on the other perspective is that what's just so horrible about this is that they're not doing it because they actually care. They're doing it because they are aware that this is something that people care about, and now they're using us as a political card to try to gain some points without mentioning all the terrible things that their president did to children and families.
Sorry, something's going on with my microphone. It's a pretty lazy argument, right? It's something that I feel like the Republican Party is grasping for their next messaging and to cling to the Trump administration. Simultaneously, the Biden administration is in a tough position because, as you know too well, it's not like the Obama-Biden administration was not part of the expansion of this crisis for many reasons, which we can get to in a second. But now they have to somewhat amend the situation at the border that was exacerbated by Trump, while simultaneously not completely abandoning, I guess, the Obama administration. I mean, do you feel like there's an acceptance of what the Obama administration did to exacerbate this crisis at this point with the Biden administration? It's a weird dance, right?
Yeah, I would say that the circumstances are different than they were under Obama. And you can trust me when I say that I'm one of the people who was very critical of the Obama administration when he was president, and a lot of his actions towards immigration were not what we thought they would be when he got elected. I would say that right now, the Biden administration came into an entire different reality of the policies at the border, the policies of asylum, of just in general of immigration. I mean, they have to start from a place of reconstructing some of these policies, bringing them back. When we're talking about, for example, asylum or refugee resettlement, right? Like they were gone. They were just all completely destroyed, so that they really were trying to make sure that people wouldn't come to the US. And so now you have an administration who's coming in, you have a huge challenge to recreate a lot of these systems. And also, I really do think that there is a stronger movement in the immigrant rights movement. There is a stronger narrative of the humanity of migrants that didn't exist before, that I think has pushed the Biden administration to ensure that they are doing everything in their power to make sure that the kids are okay and the families are able to be okay. Now, can they do more? Absolutely. There's still something called Title 42, which is basically what Trump enacted so that people wouldn't come, using COVID as an excuse to not let people in and request asylum. So adults and families are not able to request asylum yet. And that's something that the Biden administration hasn't changed, and that we are pushing them to change and to create the systems to welcome families and adults, as well as they're doing with children right now.
Can we talk about some of the conditions that differed? Like, how did, this is such a hard conversation because the Obama administration, okay, we'll get to the roots in a second, but I do really want to clarify the difference between the border conditions, the detainment at the border during the Obama administration, which, let's just be very clear, you were undocumented, correct? Like, what's the status you're in right now, just so folks have a background of where you stand?
Yeah, I have DACA right now.
Okay. So how are the conditions different between the Obama and Trump administration?
I mean, are we talking about particularly at the border? Yeah. So if we kind of take a step back and think about the way in which immigration has been framed, not just by Republicans, but I think in so many ways also by some moderate Democrats, and especially under the Obama administration, there's this sort of the framing of people migrating into the U.S. has been based on security. Right, it's not based on humanitarian needs and kind of thinking about why are people leaving if there's nothing we can do to keep people from leaving and migrating. How can we ensure that we have a humane system at the border? And rather we based all of our not just the narrative but the actions in security. So what that means is that now the Border Patrol is literally the biggest law enforcement agency in the entire nation, right? So maybe this is a bit of a tangent, but why did Border Patrol end up going to Portland when things were going on over there last year? Why was it that it was Border Patrol? Because they have so many resources. They're so big, right? And so my point here is that what we have right now is a situation where the people in the front lines at the border are cops. They are military people. And of course, the way they're going to receive people is in the ways that they know, right? Putting them in places that are not humane. And unfortunately, that's exactly what they did under the Obama administration. That's what they did under the Trump administration. And that's why you saw like all these places that looked like cages. You saw the blankets, right? The foil, whatever you call them, the blankets that the kids were using, because we have a system that was created to enforce, just to militarize the border, and not necessarily figuring out how you could create a welcoming border where you had people who really needed to seek asylum, be welcomed and not be in these kinds of situations. I would say that in this moment, people like adults and families, there are very few who are coming, again, because of Title 42. And children, in the situation of children, there is a much lower number of kids who are in the hands of Border Patrol in those conditions. Majority of the kids are right now in the hands of HHS and the refugee resettlement agencies, which is better, of course. But we need to get them, of course, out of there as well as soon as possible into the hands of their sponsors and parents.
In terms of the facilities, the camps, the reports that were coming out during the Trump administration in terms of the profiteering, could you describe a little bit more of that? Like, who? There was a turn. It went from bad to like, and I've talked about this on the show before. I was in Guatemala about a month ago, and I met somebody who was put in one of these facilities, and then moved off to other facilities, and in really, really, really inhumane, very inhumane circumstances. You know, so much so not just put into houses with, you know, hundreds and hundreds of people in very small spaces, very cold spaces. Not to mention the journey to get to the border, but also was put in shackles around his neck, around his wrists, around his ankles, and then forced to go into a week of farm work camps to make the money to be able to go back home. Because when they took him back to Guatemala, they gave him $7. He earned $1 a day to be able to go from Guatemala City to Lago Atitlan, which is like 6 hours away. $7 to get back. Good luck. So like these stories don't come out, and I say this because he told me the story thinking we didn't know, and the truth is most people don't know. I didn't know, and I read about the horrifying situation at the border. I didn't know they were putting shackles around people, around their necks. So there's money to be made in this. I mean, the fact that he was like farming, what can we like go through some of the cronyism of the Trump administration in terms of how they saw this as an opportunity? Because that's kind of the root of it, right? Like they saw it as an opportunity to make money.
Yeah, and I mean, I wouldn't know the exact circumstances of this case, but what I can say in terms of the conditions of the detention of migrants at the border, and I don't think people necessarily understand the different agencies that kind of move people around. But just a little quick background is that when people get here, they're handled by Border Patrol, and there's specific places that the Border Patrol has to hold people, which were meant in the very beginning and have been meant to have people there for less than 72 hours. And the purpose of that is to know who they are, to fingerprint them, to, you know, all the sort of intakes that they do. And then they get transferred over to ICE, which is like, of course, a different agency. And then ICE has its own detention centers. And they, many times people are there for much longer. Border Patrol, again, those places, which are horrible places, first of all, we're supposed to be for less than 72 hours. I don't think people should be there at all, but that's the policy. And under the Trump administration, people were there for sometimes months. I mean, you had literally human beings who were trapped in places where migrants, Spanish-speaking migrants, call them hieleras, which means ice chests, because they're so cold. They're given burritos. This is what most of the children we interview with Raíces tell us, that uncooked burritos every single day, maybe once or twice, maybe in 15 days they would shower once or twice. I mean, just as you can think of, like, as a human being, what are your needs? Most of them were not met. And this was from children to adults to entire families. And so that to us was, of course, part of the bigger problem of family separation in 2018 and everything else that happened. But what's challenging is that also, part of it also happened under Obama. And now Border Patrol is still holding people. And once we let more people in, if they undo Title 42, we're going to end up with a similar problem of Border Patrol still holding people in their custody and putting them in these terrible places. And so what we're asking is for these entire framework of militarization and sort of always focused on the security part of things to change to a humanitarian framework of how do we make sure that we are receiving people in the most humane ways. If we have to process them in 72 hours, where can they be so that we can meet their humanitarian needs, and then they can go on and wait for the court so they can ask for asylum.
How did we get here? It's the root.
Yeah, it's a great question. I've been organizing around immigration for over a decade now, and so before that, I was a kid. I started organizing when I was like 22, and I was completely undocumented. And I don't know the stories of people before that, but what I do remember is 9/11 and how things changed in when it comes to the immigration, the narrative, the laws, the policies, everything just got so bad after 9/11. And unfortunately, we actually have we created a podcast called Homeland Insecurity that like we talk about Homeland Security as a department and how it was created after 9/11, right? With this mindset that we needed to protect America from foreigners, from people from outside. And unfortunately, instead of focusing all of our efforts on actually keeping out threats like a virus, right? And other actual threats to this country, we ended up focusing all of our attention and keeping people out, migrants, immigrants, right? And I mean, I can go on, and I do recommend folks listening to Homeland Insecurity, but in a nutshell, we went from George W. Bush talking about how we were going to pass immigration reform and how immigrants were so good to this country as a Republican, to a Bush and then a Trump, and then all these Republicans who now have completely changed their narrative to really demonize, dehumanize immigrants. And, narrative shapes policy and policy shapes the lives of people. And so I think that's a really big part of how we got to this point, and we have to turn back.
What specifically, as opposed to say like the late 90s when we had our last immigration surge, where it was primarily Mexican population, now it's Central American. What's kind of happening in Central America that's led to this crisis, which is it's not new. It's been going on for since the Obama administration, but it's definitely surged.
Yeah. So this is the reason why it's so important to talk about the root causes of migration and how, as a country, we can't look away from what's going on around the world. I mean, we are the most powerful nation in the world, and if we are looking away from what's happening or contributing to the harm of the livelihood, right, of people in other countries, we're going to have people coming and knocking at our doors. And so in the 90s, I'm a 90s immigrant. I'm Mexican. And for the most part, if you looked at the trends of migration around that time, it was people like myself migrating in the 90s. And it was also around the time when NAFTA was enacted. That was also around the time that I still remember many people in Mexico, especially farmers, especially people who lived in rural areas, literally getting, out of work. Many people who were growing corn could no longer grow corn because it was all coming from the United States. And I mean, I can talk about NAFTA for another whole episode, but what I'm trying to point to is that our foreign policy has had an impact in other countries, whether it is providing, either things like NAFTA and other trade policies, and also our aid in destabilizing governments or helping, not really helping, but harming the democracy that could potentially happen in other countries. And all of that has had an impact. And to your question on Central America, unfortunately, what we hear a lot from the kids that we are providing services to is that a lot of them are leaving because there was, for example, in Guatemala, there was a hurricane. Majority, I would say, of people who have left because of the hurricane are indigenous people. A lot of people are leaving from Honduras because of the violence that has happened, because of the gangs. And so there's a lot of root causes, but it's important for people to understand that if we're not being careful in our foreign policy, we're going to have people coming in. I mean, trust me, you can build the biggest wall that you want to build, and people will find a way to come and seek home and safety.
I guess the final question is what do we expect the Biden administration to do? They've sent Kamala Harris to the border. She's like the ambassador. I guess I don't understand why she is the ambassador to this and not Biden, or maybe I do understand, and it's just classic politics. But also, what are we expecting? Do we expect something big? Do we expect something transformative? Is it sort of happening behind the scenes and we just don't really know?
Mm-hmm. I don't really know exactly what the steps that they're taking are, other than what I've also seen on the news and the headlines. I would hope that they are taking a different approach. I would hope that the approach again is thinking about what are foreign policies that we are working on right now with other countries. How is the United States either helping or intervening in human rights across the world, rather than helping to destabilize and helping to push people out. I hope that is what the vice president is focused in on, and actually changing what we have done in the past. And in terms of the border, what I can say is this, is that every single year there's going to be a wave of people migrating into the United States. This happens every year. The organization I work with, RAICES, has literally every year a plan from like March to August to provide services to a lot of people, because this happens every year. So what are we going to do next year, right? What are we going to do to ensure that all of the terrible things that the Trump administration did are undone, but also how we're moving past that to create welcoming borders and give people a chance to ask for asylum, rather than continuing to build walls and continuing to deport people to harm that they're running from.
Erika Andiola, we just put your website up there. RAICES, Erika, of course, is the Chief Advocacy Officer for RAICES. They're doing great work. Thank you. We'll have you on next time to talk about NAFTA, because you're right. That's a whole other conversation I'd love to talk about at some point. I'm nerding out, wonking out on this, but it's not something that's wonky. It's actually incredibly horrifying, and hopefully the Biden administration will be able to step it up and help amend these situations quickly and reunify families, because we haven't seen the stories trickle in, and they're heartening, but they're also horrifying that it's been this long. For so many families, to mothers and parents, to see their children. So thank you for the great work and the courage. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Of course. All right, we'll be right back with Simon Narode and Jordan Zakarin to talk about the news today. The news. Well, hello. You guys, you know about Sunset Lake CBD. It is a farmer-owned company that ships craft CBD products directly from their farm in Vermont to your door. Sunset Lake CBD has a ton of products for everybody. They offer tinctures and gummies and salves and coffee, all designed to help with stress, aches, and pains. And their farm was originally a dairy farm in Vermont. It was the Ben & Jerry's farm, and they decided to diversify it and grow premium hemp. When you support them, you are supporting sustainable agriculture that enhances rural communities and creates meaningful employment, where they pay a minimum wage of $15 an hour. And then the employees own the majority of their company, and they support independent media like our show, The Majority Report, and the David Pakman Show. Oh, and breaking news, they have dog biscuits that even humans can eat, because the only ingredients they have are peanut butter, pumpkin, and oat flour. So if you're into that, you can just sit down and have dinner with your dog, I guess, or cat. I mean, I guess cats like it too. I don't know. They're probably into more meaty stuff. I don't know. I like cats. I had cats growing up, but I got dogs now. Dogs are the way to go, in my opinion. I love Sunset Lake CBD. I talk about it all the time. People make fun of me because they think I'm peddling it. I'm not. I use it. I use it on my all my elderly joint aches and pains. I use Sunset Lake CBD hemp. I smoke it when I get a migraine, which is often. And instead of smoking other stuff, which will disrupt my day, and sometimes it can be really disruptive, CBD is perfect because it alleviates the migraines and then doesn't cause me to go into a paranoid situation where I'm like, why am I here on this planet? That's pretty much it. Dorsey.
I'll take the paranoid, why do I live on this planet too, but I also enjoy the CBD stuff with, when it doesn't have that effect. But I'm excited about, I didn't know that they had lotion and soap. I don't think the soap has any CBD, but it sounds really nice. It's kind of hempy, and I'm always into new soaps, so I'm gonna try that out. But the lotion is great. I like the Solve, but
Smells so good.
it's like I need to get it on me more, and it's like, so you got to work on that. So I just I'm gonna try this lotion out and see what that's like. So that's next on my test list. I'll let you know how that goes.
We've become product people.
This is a good one to be a product person for, I gotta say. I've never talked about products before, and this one, it feels good to be able to talk about this one. And
a little bit of an update for you. My chupacabra bite is drying out. It's been a solid it's been 9 days since I was bitten by something. We don't know what. Originally, like there are these insane mosquitoes. They're like dengue mosquitoes in Vieques, which is very close to Puerto Rico. It's an island it's part of Puerto Rico. It's an island off the coast. I went there to go film last week, not this last weekend, but the weekend before. And I woke up in the morning and I had I thought it was like a slew of mosquito bites, but it was huge. It was just this insane thing that was on my leg, and then another part of my leg. And it popped. It was gross. But I've been using the CBD on it. No, but this is magic. This is medical. Like in the old days, we'd go to the pharmacy, we'd put something on that probably causes cancer. Instead, I've been putting the CBD on, and I don't even have my Band-Aid on now. And it's doing great because it itches. That's the problem. And so the CBD is really helping because there's a little arnica in it too. I recommend it. You're laughing at me. I also had ant bites. I also thought I had sea lice at one point. This is like my therapy when I'm doing this. They're going to call me up and be like,
Nomi. If you were
Nomi.
attacked by bugs too, this product can help you. CBD.
Yes. They're going to call me up and be like, Nomi, we love that you're so passionate about this product, but could you talk about the coffee maybe?
For 2 weeks, no bug bites.
I'm like, I have ailments here and there.
Hey, it is a legitimate cure for what ails you. Even that.
I don't know if I'd make the commercial cuts. No, but really, guys, it's amazing. There are a ton of products out there. They are so ethical. They believe in progressive movements. It's all high quality. It's not like that crap CBD you get at like bodegas or other places. Yeah, highly recommend it. The gummies are amazing. I do the tincture every night to go to sleep. You can get 20% off of your order. If you go to sunsetlakecbd.com, all you got to do is type in Nomi, N-O-M-I, go to sunsetlakecbd.com, type in N-O-M-I, and you get 20% off your entire order. Yes, Ikosi in Greek. That's what you get off of your order. 20% whole. If you go to sunsetlakecbd.com and type in Nomi. We will be right back with our panel. Hello, welcome back to the Nomiki Show. Jordan Zakarin is the media producer with a more progressive union. Perfect union. Progressive union? Progressive union. I can't hear you, Jordan.
We would like both. I mean, it's called Perfect, but progressive would be great too.
Why does it say progressive?
What was my newsletter?
I was like, it's perfect. I know that. Yeah, you run. See, I corrected it because I was like, I know what this is. I follow you guys.
It, you know?
Jesus Christ. You're also the founder of Progressives Everywhere newsletter. I swear I will get this right eventually.
It's all right.
You know, we are a tiny little situation here. And Simon Rode is a producer here at the Nomiki Show. He is also former Bernie Sanders organizer in 2020 and a socialist writer. All right, lots of stuff happening in the Mideast right now. I think that's pretty much going to be the conversation today, just to give you guys a heads up. But it does tie back to home, because how dare any New York politician question Israel or even pretend, oh God, or support Palestine in any way whatsoever. I mean, this has always been kind of an untouchable area in New York City politics. I think the thing is things are changing a little bit, but not everybody has gotten that memo. Andrew Yang, who is, let's just be real, he is a seasoned New York politician. So we don't know why he wouldn't have the courage
Legendary.
to go with the flow. He's
Legendary
been institutionalized. He's been trained by the most seasoned. I mean, he's worked his way up that ladder. So why would he know what the kids are saying now? Math. Andrew Yang was protesting so much. Oh, how quickly they turn on you. He was confronted by New York City residents upset about his support. And when we say support, it's like support for Israel. Let's play that clip.
So that, what do you have to say about your tweet directly to New Yorkers right now?
It's heartbreaking. All of this is happening in the Middle East. It's heartbreaking, right? It is. You know, people are dying. Do you condemn Israel for that? Do you condemn Israel for their unjust acts against the innocent Palestinians? Sir, I'm talking to him.
We got the publicist over here. We got
I'm
the guys
talking
over
to
here
him.
saying,
We gotta go.
don't say anything
Sir,
that's
you're
gonna fuck up
touching
your
me. Please
campaign.
don't
And
touch
that's
me.
why you don't have my vote, and I guarantee you don't have the vote of a lot of New Yorkers.
Sir, I have just one.
So that, what do you have to say about
So
your tweet?
this took place in my neighborhood, Astoria. So I like to say this because Astoria is definitely more progressive than most of the city. That's important to note. Northwest Queens is I think in terms of concentration, the most progressives in terms of voting in the entire country. But it is also there is a Muslim population in a large Arabic community in Astoria, as well as others. That's significant. It's important. So, you know, Andrew Yang thought, why don't I show up on the day of the day that there's just bombings taking place and do a press conference under the Astoria Bridge? What on earth, in Astoria Park, I should say. What was this man thinking? What on earth on a holy holiday? So let's start with Jordan, because he is in New York, and Simon, you have lived in New York, so you can speak on this too.
Well, Andrew Yang, I don't know what he was thinking showing up there. He doesn't really know where he is. I mean, he's, hasn't been he was in New York all of last year. So I don't know what his directional sense is, but, he's backed by a lot of the very big Orthodox Jewish community and leaders. And that's big for him. So I do not agree with him at all. And like I said, as a Jewish person, as a Jewish New Yorker, I don't not agree with his policies at all. But I think that's why he's doing it. That's why he's being, very firm about, I support Israel, because he has these very right-wing Democrats. There are Democrats, but they're kind of not. They caucus a lot with Republicans, but he has this group of supporters that is going to make up a decent core of his base in an election that, you only need to get maybe 25% of the initial vote to win. And so that's why he's doing it. I think it's despicable, and I do not like him. And I think that he's pandering to a very small group of people because he knows it's a very divided election, and that's why he's doing it. But he doesn't do anything for any authentic reasons, so none of this is surprising.
This is a low turnout election too, but it's also a ranked choice voting election. So they don't just have bets on Andrew Yang; they also have it on Eric Adams, who's the borough president, and probably a few others too. That's just It's the Orthodox community in Brooklyn for folks who are curious. This is constituencies. This is politics 101. Like, we're not doing identitarian. This is called turnout neighborhoods, and neighborhoods are still more or less pretty identitarian in New York and a lot of major cities across the country. Simon, you've lived in New York.
I have, yeah. And actually, my father's side of the family is Jewish and grew up in New York. And yeah, this is, I want to say disappointing, but it's just it's kind of so boring, because it's like, this is politics, right? Like, it's when a politician takes a stance on a political issue, you'd hope that it's reflective of their values or their moral compass or something like that. When most of the time, the truth is that they're just trying to win an election, or they're trying to win their re-election, or they're trying to win more donors. And so, I feel like it's so disappointing, right? And he put out an apology, if you can even call it. It's not an apology, on his Twitter today, like trying to clarify things or clear things up, but it's mostly just a lot of the sort of like all lives matter kind of sentiment, like, I mourn people who died on both sides, and the violence from both sides is real. It's just like, really, just call it settler colonialism, and people will stop hounding you in the streets about it.
It's not just Andrew Yang. I just saw Gary Peters, the senator from Michigan, put out a statement that like hardly mentioned, Palestinian people at all. And I think there's like a fear too, I think the Jewish community, even the ones who aren't super Orthodox, you grow up in, like, you go to Hebrew school or something, you get taught about the infallibility of Israel. You get taught that like they're always under threat, and they kind of are, but it becomes, I don't want to say a victim complex, because the Jews have been victims throughout history, but it now kind of inoculates, I think, Israel against a lot of criticism. And so I think people who are otherwise liberal often have these beliefs, and it's very hard to break that. So I think the Democratic Party overall is still in that position. They still are catering to the people who are, these are old politicians. Andrew Yang is not old, but like Biden's 78. He was born like right during the Holocaust. And so I think that's a big part of it too.
Well, and it's interesting, because we talk about constituencies on a micro level, like New York City. Yes, there are constituencies that are especially in low turnout elections, like, you need those constituencies, especially when there's so many people in a race. It is transactional style, old school politics, where remnants of the machines are weaker now, but like the cultural remnants of the machine still exist. But on a national level, it's about money. And we saw with the Keith Ellison race against whatever his name was. Thank you. Tom Perez. I'm like, Tom Perez. And Tom Perez, he barely squeaked by in that race. And there's a lot of question about whether or not he actually did win it, because there's some stuff happening behind the scenes. But there was a massive smear effort right before that election, in which you had very right-wing pro-Israel groups that don't necessarily always align with the Democratic Party. People like Alan Dershowitz going on air. I mean, there's a debate clip of me. I don't know if we can find it. Maybe we can play it at the end of the show, because it's just funny to watch, debating him, because it was like the night before the vote, in which Alan Dershowitz tried to smear Keith Ellison, saying, I'm going to leave the Democratic Party if Keith Ellison, the Muslim, is the chair, because he's a Muslim, and whatever he was doing. And guess what? Alan Dershowitz still left the Democratic Party, and then like went to go to Epstein's Island and celebrate with Donald Trump and whatever the hell he's been doing. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's like, but the Democrats, this just shows this dance between the two sides. And the DNC building facilities have been almost in the majority funded by very pro-right-wing, pro-Israel constituencies. And yet they don't need that. Like, this is my whole thing. The money's there. Why do you have to be beholden to this? Netanyahu is as far right as you're going to get. He's on a sinking ship. It actually doesn't even work geopolitically to back him anymore under the Biden administration, because he's built his relationships with people that aren't necessarily. It's complicated, but why?
I think what's tough is that there is this equation of, because it is the Jewish state, Israel and Jews, and so it feels, even as like a Jewish person, you initially have this shock. We're like, oh, you have to back it, and that. Netanyahu, I always say, like, compared him to like George W. Bush, and obviously now Trump or whomever. Like, he's just as bad. So I think the problem is equating Israel. I think a lot of Jews equate Israel and Jewish people. So if there's an assault on Israel, it's an assault, like an anti-Semitic assault. And there's this mental gymnastics you have to do, I think, to like get out of that, to break out of that kind of mind, and realize, oh, I'm an American. I can criticize what the American government's doing in the same way that you can criticize what the Israeli government's doing. And I think that people, it just leads like our generation are starting to realize that. And I think it takes like another generation for people to be more, unfortunately, for people to be more aware of that. And it's horrible because people are suffering so much. And it's this like mind lock that people have.
And the go ahead, Zakarin.
Oh, I just wanted to chime in there in sort of response. Like, you were talking about how like a lot of Jewish people conflate Israel and Judaism. I don't think, like, I know lots of Jewish people who don't do that, right? Who are condemning the Israeli government and supporting the Palestinian people. I think a lot of the time it's non-Jewish people in the United States who think that in order to not be anti-Semitic, they have to support Israel in every way. And
if AIPAC decides to take them on a trip to Israel and pay for nice hotel rooms and food and give them campaign donations, then sure, I'm sure that they'll side with that.
You'll be amazed at what happens at Birthright. I think that's one of those programs where they take kids who are like 15, 16 into their 20s to Israel and create this connection, because it is, I've never been, but apparently it's a cool country. But I think there is this like, people do get caught up in it. And I agree that like the Christian right is super pro-Israel because they want to see,
the Jews out and take it over.
Well, they want to see like the end of the world, the apocalypse. It's part of their thing. But so they're not really genuine about it, but it is this weird coalition, but it all ends up being hard right people.
Well, okay, we can go down this rabbit hole a little bit more, but there are also progressive Israelis who I know personally, like real progressive Israelis who I know personally, who are also very concerned about their family members and have been posting videos. And I mean, very progressive Israelis. So it's just a lot. But I think if we bottom line it around Netanyahu and how the U.S. responds to Netanyahu, because right now when we're seeing our leaders be completely just puppeting whatever the right-wing government is saying rather than having a nuanced take, that's a concern. Okay, let's shift just a little bit to Jeremy Corbyn, because speaking of people who've been smeared for being anti-Semitic, Jeremy Corbyn, who of course was the Labour leader of the UK, he was an MP, or he is an MP. He also was the candidate for prime minister twice and lost to Boris Johnson. He was attacked over and over, smeared for being anti-Semitic, for his foreign policy, specifically around Palestine. So here is a video of him talking to thousands of people at a rally.
There is a point of hope. The whole world is seeing in real time what is actually happening. Our solidarity here in London is to bring about the permanent peace in which the Palestinian people will no longer ever be under occupation again.
The man still got it. Couple things. Wow, you've been smeared. You've lost your prime minister position because of the massive smear campaign against you, which worked. They kicked you out of your own effing party and then kind of like had to bring you back in because of this. There has been a massive effort in the Labour Party to extinguish anybody who like recognizes Palestine, Palestinian people. I mean, it is the Tony Blairs of the world, the neoliberal contingency in the Labour Party have done all they can to just erase any sort of leftists and paint them as being anti-Semitic. Yet he still shows up and gets thousands of people at a rally after he's lost 2 prime minister races. Where do we see this going? Is this, I hate to think like political positioning, but like he still got it.
Well, I mean, the people who kicked him out didn't do too well in the last elections last week. And so, I mean, if anything, he can gloat and be like, I don't think your centrist milquetoast nothing campaign seems to be working. So at the very least, he must be feeling a little bit better about himself, feel a little more unleashed.
Jeremy Corbyn unleashed. Who's the next Jeremy? I think there's some rumors about the next Jeremy Corbyn, but I don't know. Simon, what are your thoughts?
I'm trying to remember when Jeremy Corbyn was arrested. a long time ago. There's like a photo of him being arrested. He was protesting, I think, apartheid, which would make this like a very consistent sort of position for him to be holding. But I also sort of feel like it shouldn't be like something that we have to like celebrate Jeremy Corbyn for, acknowledging what should be like everybody's position, you know? Like it should be very obvious what's going on. But I think a lot more conversation needs to be had about the way that this is covered in the mainstream media, in the UK and also in the United States. You know, this discussion of like, oh, the Israel-Palestine conflict is, you know, it's a very long and complicated history, and there's violence from both sides, and it's just awful. And we would really love just there were peace without any explanation for what the context is and what's going on in the country.
Well, much of the corporate media, as we're probably aware of, is intrinsically tied to these interests. So that's for another show. Jordan Zakarin, Simon Narode, we got to wrap. Sorry, guys. You're the best. We will see you next Wednesday. Thank you for joining us as always. Enjoy your week. And thank you to everybody who's been in those chats, all the moderators who are scrubbing the chats of trolls. Get rid of those trolls. They're in there. Thank you so much for all that you do. We're really grateful. We've got a couple of shout outs. Vinny Holiday said, you mentioned yesterday on MR Majority Report that the left has become transactional. Can you expand on what that means? Well, it depends on what you decide is the left. I am specifically talking about some organizations that depend on funding and are newer and, you know, align with like interests and don't necessarily know when they're becoming tools for transactional forces. That's another show. That's a very big topic. I don't know if I can answer it all now, but I appreciate that, Vinny. Good question. We'll talk about it. I promise. Prairie Fire Kowalski says, hello to Mr. Fancy Pants and Pagan Communist on Twitch. Thank you for subscribing. Mods, do us a favor and send us your addresses, as we keep saying, so we can send you a Nomiki Show mug. Yeah, we got mugs. I don't have one right here, but we got mugs. We got mugs and stickers and bags. Oh my. So send us your addresses at thenomikishow@gmail.com. And in the meantime, we will see you tomorrow on Thursday, 3 p.m. Eastern, right here on Twitch and YouTube and all the spots and in the podcast world. And of course, please join us on Patreon, patreon.com/thenomiki show. You get lots of stuff, lots of content, tons of content. And if you go to that level, you get like swag too. More to come. Go check it out. We will see you mañana. Stay in solidarity.
Show. The Nomiki Show. Yeah. Clash momentarily for class solidarity. Cash circulating, give the masses back its currency. Greed from elites, oligarchs stay fed. Deep state, fake fed, everybody break bread. Racism, homophobia, sexism, religion in this melting pot we live in. Time to build a new system, unionize labor rights. Highlight the issue, talking heads left is best. The saga continues. The Nomiki Show. The Nomiki Show. The Nomiki